For concrete
fellas
steps,
ready to move?
that's all
Yeah,
it
let's
took
go.
to turn an ordinary
Hold up, what's the
afternoon
play?
in Harlem
We walk
into
and
a
talk.
nightmare
Come on.
that would echo for decades. The sidewalk was busy, the grocery store doors were open, and people were going about their lives. Then, in a single moment of anger, a mob enforcer put his hands on a pregnant woman and shoved her. She fell. She didn't scream. She just lay there, one hand on her belly, trying to breathe, and the man who did it didn't run. He didn't panic. He simply walked away, like nothing had happened. That woman was Mame Johnson, 7 months pregnant, and she wasn't just anyone. She was the wife of Ellsworth Bumpy Johnson, the most feared and respected man in Harlem, a man who controlled streets, businesses, and lives without needing to raise his voice. A man known for his discipline, his code, and his patience. On that day, all of it was tested. The ambulance took its time getting there. Neighbors gathered. Blood dried into the cracks of the concrete. By the time Mame reached the hospital, the damage was already done. Doctors tried. Nurses worked quietly. But some things can't be undone. The baby never took a breath. Word traveled fast through Harlem. Faster than sirens. Faster than phone calls. By nightfall, Bumpy Johnson knew exactly what had happened. He didn't shout. He didn't threaten anyone. He sat beside his wife and listened as the doctor explained the facts in a calm, professional voice. And when the doctor finished, Bumpy nodded once. No tears. No breakdown. Just silence. The man responsible was Vincent Esposito, 28 years old, a small-time mob collector working under his uncle in the Italian crime family. He had pushed a woman because he thought he could, because he believed Harlem wouldn't answer back, because he didn't know whose life he had touched. Within hours, whispers moved through back rooms and dark hallways. Names were spoken, addresses were confirmed, and somewhere in Queens, Vincent began to understand the weight of what he'd done. His uncle knew too. He didn't shout. He didn't protect him. He just looked at his nephew and told him the truth. This wasn't something money or apologies could fix. What happened next wasn't fast. It wasn't loud. And it wasn't public. That's what made it terrifying. Bumpy Johnson didn't want chaos. He wanted balance restored. And his wife didn't ask for blood. She asked for something far worse. 48 hours after that push on those concrete steps, Vincent Esposito's world was already collapsing. Businesses were closing. Family members were panicking. Phones wouldn't stop ringing. And somewhere in the dark, a decision had been made about what justice would look like. But this story isn't about a quick revenge. It's about time. About consequences that don't end in a single night. And about what happens when a powerful man chooses not to kill his enemy, but to let him live. Because sometimes living is the real punishment. By the next morning, Harlem felt different. Not louder, not quieter, just tighter, like the streets themselves were holding their breath. People didn't say Bumpy Johnson's name out loud, but they didn't have to. Everyone knew something had shifted. When something bad happened in Harlem, people usually reacted with noise. Arguments, sirens, crowds. This time, there was only silence. And silence around Bumpy Johnson was never a good sign. Bumpy didn't leave his wife's side at the hospital. He sat in a chair near the window, watching the city move without him. Men came and went quietly. Illinois Gordon, Willie Lee, Marcus Cole. No one raised their voice. No one asked questions that didn't need answers. They already knew what mattered. A pregnant woman had been hurt. A child had been lost. That kind of thing didn't fade away. It demanded a response. Vincent Esposito, meanwhile, was learning a different lesson. He had grown up believing family connections made him untouchable. His uncle was respected. His last name carried weight. He had collected money, pushed people around, and walked away from problems before. This time, he felt the walls closing in. Friends stopped answering his calls. Bars he usually drank at suddenly felt hostile. Every knock at the door made his heart jump. His uncle, Marco, didn't comfort him. He didn't offer plans or promises. He told Vincent to sit down and listen. Harlem, he explained, had its own rules, and Bumpy Johnson followed them more strictly than anyone. You didn't hurt women. You didn't touch children. And you never brought chaos where order already existed. Vincent had broken all of it in one careless moment. Back in Harlem, the grocery store steps were already clean, but people still avoided them. Mr. Chin kept his head down, reopening his shop like nothing happened. Though he flinched every time the door opened, Mrs. Patterson lit a candle in her window that night. Others did the same. No one planned it. It just happened. Bumpy finally stood up and left the hospital late that evening. He didn't rush. He didn't look angry. That calm was what scared the people around him the most. When Bumpy was loud, problems could be talked through. When he went quiet, decisions were already made. What no one outside his inner circle knew was that this wasn't about pride or reputation. This was about control, about sending a message that didn't fade with time. Bumpy believed that real power wasn't in how fast it could end someone, but in how long your choices lasted. And his wife understood that better than anyone. Somewhere in Queens, Vincent tried to sleep. He couldn't. He kept replaying the fall in his head. The sound, the blood, the way the woman hadn't screamed. He told himself it was an accident. He told himself he didn't mean it. But deep down, fear was replacing denial. Because he could feel it now. Whatever was coming wasn't going to be quick. It wasn't going to be loud. And it wasn't going to stop once it started. And as night settled over New York, with Harlem watching and waiting, one thing was clear to everyone who truly understood the streets. The worst part hadn't happened yet. The next 2 days moved slowly on the surface, but underneath, everything was shifting. In Harlem, people paid attention to patterns. Who opened their shop late? Who didn't open at all? Which faces disappeared from corners that were usually occupied? Bumpy Johnson's name still wasn't spoken, but his presence was everywhere. When power moves quietly, it moves fastest. Illinois Gordon spent those hours walking, listening, and confirming what he already suspected. Vincent Esposito wasn't hiding well. Fear makes people careless. He had gone to family, thinking blood ties meant protection. But blood ties can turn heavy when they bring danger to the door. Every man Illinois spoke to gave him the same look. Not anger, not loyalty, just resignation. Like they all understood that the situation had passed the point of negotiation. At the hospital, Mame lay awake long after the lights were dimmed. Her body was exhausted, but her mind wouldn't rest. Nurses checked in softly, careful with their words. Some recognized who she was. Some didn't. To all of them, she was just a woman who had lost a child. But inside, she was carrying something heavier than grief. She kept replaying the moment on the steps. Not the fall, but the way the man walked away. That stayed with her more than the pain. Bumpy visited less during the day, but his men knew that didn't mean distance. It meant planning. Meetings happened behind closed doors. Conversations cut short when outsiders appeared. Phones rang once, twice, then went silent. Every move was deliberate. Bumpy wasn't interested in speed. He wanted certainty. Harlem had survived too long on fragile balances to let emotion break structure. Vincent felt that certainty closing in. His uncle's house no longer felt safe. The walls seemed thinner. Every sound outside made him flinch. He started asking questions that had no good answers. How long before someone came? What would they do? Would they talk first? No one reassured him. His uncle avoided eye contact now, busying himself with papers and phone calls that ended abruptly. Protection, Vincent was learning, has limits. From another angle, the Italian crews were nervous too. This wasn't their usual kind of problem. There was no territory dispute, no money argument. This was personal, and personal situations were the hardest to control. Some men whispered about retaliation, others about cutting losses. No one agreed on anything except one thing. Harlem wasn't bluffing. Back on Lenox Avenue, people continued with their routines, but every action felt cautious. Mothers held their children closer. Shopkeepers watched the street a little longer before locking up. Everyone understood that when something like this happened, it never stayed contained. The streets remembered. They always did. As night approached again, Bumpy stood by the window of his office, looking out over the neighborhood he protected for decades. He wasn't thinking about violence. He was thinking about consequences, about what kind of lesson would last, the kind that wouldn't need repeating. Somewhere across the city, Vincent sat alone in a dark room, realizing too late that silence wasn't safety. It was a pause before impact, and as both sides waited, one with control, the other with fear, the tension stretched tighter than ever, because whatever was coming next wasn't meant to be forgotten. By the third night, the city felt like it was waiting for a signal. Phones rang less, but when they did, people answered immediately. Men who usually joked and argued kept their voices low. No one wanted to be the one who missed something important. This wasn't about territory anymore. It was about a line that had been crossed. And everyone knew lines like that demanded an answer. Bumpy's inner circle gathered quietly. Not all at once, never in the same way twice. Cars parked on different blocks. Lights stayed dim. Names were spoken carefully. Information was checked and rechecked. Bumpy listened more than he talked. When he did speak, it was measured, almost calm, which made the air in the room feel heavier. He wasn't asking if something could be done. He was deciding when. At the hospital, Mame sat alone near the window, watching the streetlights flicker on. Her body was healing, slowly, but her heart felt hollow. She thought about the life that never got a chance, about how unfairly fast everything had changed. When Bumpy visited, they didn't talk much. They didn't need to. He held her hand. She squeezed once. That was enough. Whatever happened next, it would carry her voice in it. Across the city, Vincent Esposito was unraveling. Sleep came in short bursts, broken by sudden wake-ups and racing thoughts. He kept replaying every conversation from the past few days, searching for reassurance that never came. His uncle avoided him now, staying busy, stepping outside to take calls, returning with a face that said nothing but worry. Vincent began to understand something important. When powerful people go quiet, it's not because they don't care. It's because they're finished talking. Outside, cars slow when they pass certain houses. Strangers seemed to look a second too long. Vincent wondered if he was imagining it, but fear has a way of sharpening instincts. He stopped going near windows. Every sound felt closer. Every shadow felt intentional. Back in Harlem, words spread without words. People sensed that something final was approaching. Shop owners locked up early. Mothers pulled their children inside before dark. No one needed details. Everyone understood the rhythm of the streets. They had heard this kind of silence before. Late that night, Bumpy stood alone, staring at a map spread across his desk. He traced a line with his finger, slow and deliberate, not rushed, not angry, just certain. This wasn't about proving strength. It was about making sure the lesson couldn't be misunderstood. As the hours slipped toward morning, two worlds sat on opposite sides of the same decision. One side prepared with control and patience. The other waited with fear and regret. And somewhere between them, the city held its breath, knowing that once the next move was made, nothing would ever be the same. Just before dawn, something unexpected happened. A message reached Bumpy that didn't come from Harlem at all. It came from the other side of the city, passed quietly through people who normally stayed out of his business. The Italian family wasn't closing ranks the way Vincent had hoped. They were fracturing. Fear does that. It makes alliances thin and loyalty conditional. Vincent's uncle had started making calls of his own. Not threats, not demands, offers. He knew what was at stake now. This wasn't about one reckless nephew anymore. This was about whether his entire family would survive the fallout. Businesses were already feeling pressure. Partners were suddenly busy. Doors that once opened easily were staying shut. Harlem's influence was spreading without a single public move. At the same time, police attention began to drift in uncomfortable ways. Not directly, not officially, but enough to be noticed. A patrol car lingering too long. Questions asked where none had been before. When powerful people move quietly, it creates ripples, and ripples attract eyes. Bumpy knew that balance mattered. Whatever happened next had to be clean, contained, and final in its message. At the hospital, Mame was told she could go home soon. The nurse spoke gently, like that was good news. Mame nodded, but inside, she felt a strange calm settle over her. She had already accepted that her life wouldn't return to what it was. Some things don't heal the way bones do. They change shape and stay that way. She asked one question before the nurse left. Has he been found? The nurse didn't understand, but Mame already knew the answer was closer than anyone realized. Vincent, meanwhile, was given a choice without being told it was one. Stay where he was, surrounded by people who no longer wanted him there, or move. And moving felt dangerous. Staying felt worse. His uncle suggested a place he thought was safe, quiet, out of the way. Vincent didn't argue. He didn't trust his own judgment anymore. What Vincent didn't know was that every step he took now was being watched. Not followed closely, not rushed, just noted. Harlem had patience. Bumpy had patience. And patience in this kind of game was power. As night fell again, the tension sharpened. Two sides were now making moves, neither fully aware of how close they were colliding. One mistake, one rushed decision, and everything could spiral out of control. And that was the danger, because the closer Vincent came to safety, the closer he actually came to the moment that would decide everything. The moment came quietly, just before sunrise, the way most irreversible things do. Vincent was moved under the promise of safety, driven through empty streets with no sirens and no urgency. He believed distance would protect him. He believed walls and familiar names still mattered. What he didn't understand was that the decision had already been made long before he stepped into that car. By the time he realized something was wrong, it was too late to change course. There was no shouting, no chaos, no public scene. Just a sudden stillness that made his chest tighten. When Bumpy Johnson finally stood in front of him, Vincent expected anger, threats, violence. He got none of that. Bumpy didn't raise his voice. He didn't insult him. He simply looked at him the way a man looks at a mistake that can't be undone. Vincent tried to explain himself. He talked about fear, about not knowing who Mame was, about how it wasn't meant to happen. The words sounded thin even to his own ears. Bumpy listened without interrupting. When Vincent finished, the silence returned, heavier than before. What followed wasn't what Vincent expected. There was no quick end, no dramatic moment he could brace himself for. Instead, there was a choice made for him, one that would follow him far longer than fear ever could. The kind of decision that doesn't make headlines but reshapes lives quietly, day by day. By the time Vincent's family realized what had happened, it was already irreversible. His uncle made calls in a panic. His parents begged through intermediaries. Promises were made. Money was offered. All of it came too late. Harlem had already answered. Vincent lived. That was a shock. He wasn't buried. He wasn't missing. He was alive, breathing, aware, and completely dependent on others for everything. The man who once pushed people aside now couldn't lift a hand on his own. The family that once felt powerful now gathered in hospital hallways, pleading with doctors, with anyone who would listen. But there was nothing to fix. Bumpy Johnson never visited him again. He didn't need to. The message had been delivered, not just to one man, but to everyone watching. Some lines, once crossed, don't lead to quick endings. They lead to long ones. The final twist wasn't the punishment itself. It was who asked for it. Mame Johnson never demanded blood. She chose something colder, something that lasted. And as Vincent's family begged for mercy, they finally understood the truth. The worst consequence isn't dying for what you did. It's living with it every single day. After that morning, the city slowly exhaled, not because the pain was gone, but because the uncertainty was. Harlem returned to its routines, the way it always did after a storm passed through. Shops reopened on their normal schedules. Children played on the sidewalks again. People talked, laughed, argued. Life moved forward, even when memories didn't. Vincent Esposito became a name people stopped saying out loud. Not because they forgot him, but because there was nothing left to say. He was alive, but the life he once knew was over. The strength he relied on, the fear he used to create, the confidence that came from his family name, all of it disappeared. Days turned into weeks, weeks into years, and his world shrank to hospital rooms and care facilities. He depended on others for everything. The same independence he once took for granted was gone, replaced by long hours of stillness and thought. His family tried it first. His parents visited when they could. His uncle handled arrangements quietly, keeping distance from Harlem and its consequences. But time has a way of thinning even the strongest connections. Visits became shorter, then less frequent. Eventually, they stopped altogether. The begging ended, not because forgiveness arrived, but because there was nothing left to ask for. Back in Harlem, Bumpy Johnson went back to being what it always been, a protector to some, a threat to others. A man who understood that power wasn't about chaos, but control. He didn't boast about what happened. He never told the story himself. He didn't need to. The streets remembered. They always did. Mame Johnson healed slowly. Her body recovered faster than her heart. She carried her loss quietly, without speeches or public grief. People who knew her noticed a change. She was softer in some ways, sharper in others. Stronger, but more distant. She didn't talk about revenge. She didn't talk about justice either. She focused on living, on surviving, on honoring the child she never got to raise. The grocery store on Lenox Avenue stayed open. Mr. Chin worked behind the counter every day, just like before. But every time he looked at those steps, he remembered the way time seemed to stop that afternoon. Mrs. Patterson still lived down the block. She never forgot either. Some moments leave marks that don't show on the surface. Years passed. Harlem changed. New faces arrived. Old ones disappeared. Bumpy Johnson eventually passed away, leaving behind a complicated legacy that people still argue about. Some called him a criminal. Others called him a guardian. The truth, like most things, lived somewhere in between. Mame lived a long life. She saw Harlem transform in ways she never imagined. When asked about the past, she rarely spoke in detail. But when she did, her words were simple. She believed consequences mattered more than anger. That action should echo long enough for people to understand them, and that some losses can never be balanced, only acknowledged. Vincent lived too. That was the point. He lived with time, with memory, with the weight of a single moment that changed everything. No headlines followed him. No dramatic ending closed the story. He faded into the system, into records and routines, into a life defined by what he could no longer do. In the end, there were no winners, only lessons. That power comes with responsibility. That one careless act can destroy many lives. That silence can be louder than violence. And that justice doesn't always arrive the way people expect it to. The concrete steps on Lenox Avenue are still there. People walk up and down them every day without thinking twice. The blood is long gone. The cracks remain, like reminders that some moments don't disappear. They settle into history, waiting to be remembered. And that's why this story still matters. Because it isn't just about mobsters or Harlem or one tragic afternoon. It's about choices, about consequences, and about how sometimes the heaviest punishment isn't death at all. It's living with what you've done,